Hi, thanks for tuning in today to another episode of Front Porch Conversations here at Advent Christian Village. We are in the Harmony Center today, and I'd like to introduce my guest to you. And many of you watching may not need an introduction, but this is Cheryl Gilroy. Cheryl, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for asking me.
This is not an unfamiliar place to you, is it?
No, it's not an unfamiliar place.
Well, I want to get to that, but I want us to hear about your history with the village over time. But tell us where you were born and where you grew up.
I was born and raised in Panama City, Florida. My mother and father moved to the property where my mother was still living when she passed away. When I was a year old. They moved there when I was a year old and grew up on that piece of property, so in Panama City.
And do you have siblings?
Yes, I have 4 siblings. My sister Candy lives here at the village, and then I have 3 brothers.
And they live elsewhere?
2 of them in Panama City and 1 in North Carolina. Yeah.
Well, it's good to be close to family, I'm sure.
It is.
And tell us who Candy is, for those who are watching.
Okay, Candy, my sister Candy Hall is the wife of Pastor Frank Hall, who works at the church, one of the pastors at the church.
And they've had a front porch conversation with me.
Yes.
And you were saying, well, maybe the 2 of you should have been interviewed together, you and your sister. But you said something about you didn't think you all remember the stories the same way.
Right. We never remember the events the same. And so that ends up to be like, I'm right, you're right. You're right, I'm wrong, whatever, you know. So,
but I think that's pretty much for most families.
Yeah. Well, we were not really close to each other our whole adult life until we both came here to the village. Our husbands were both pastors, and pastors, you know, end up a lot of different places. My husband and I have been all over the country. Frank and Candy have stayed basically in the southeast, so we were not physically close over the years. So our stories are different.
Right. Tell us a little bit about your husband.
My husband, Jim, which I lost in September to COVID, he was in the ministry for 44 years, and I should say he was in the pastoral ministry for 44 years. He had 22 years of that was youth ministry, youth pastor, and the other was as a senior pastor. We were in churches from Florida to Illinois twice, and way up in the top of Maine, as far as you can go, where they really know how to throw a winter. And in California twice, South Carolina, North Carolina.
And you have toured the country.
Yeah, we have. We're everywhere except the Northwest. It's the only place we haven't. We're never gone.
And where were you in Maine?
We were in Presque Isle at the State Road Church. That was the first place that he was a youth pastor, was at the State Road Church.
And I know that, you know, it's amazing to me when I first came here to learn how many people are here from Maine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a lot of people. Well, they want to get out of that winter, and then they go back up for the summer, you know, so. Yeah.
What are some of your fond memories of growing up?
I guess the main thing was that we had to create our own entertainment. Fortunately, until 1960, there were 4 of us. And then in 1960, my youngest brother was born. He came along late. He was 6 years behind my brother Robin. And so we created our own games and our own imagination. We were outside a lot. Until I was 12 years old, we lived in a small 3-room cinder block house, and with no running water or whatever. So there wasn't much room to play inside. You played outside.
But luckily you lived in Florida and could be outside most of the time.
Absolutely, yeah. Only wore shoes when we absolutely had to, you know, that sort of thing. But I remember inventing games to play, or we would invent our own scenarios, like we played circus, and, you know, we all had different names. We named ourselves, you know, that sort of thing. Those are the memories that I have, is playing with my brothers and sisters outside.
And what is your history? When did you begin coming to Advent Christian Village?
Well, I've known about it since right after I was born, probably. We used to come over here. My dad would get us up really early on Sunday mornings, like before daybreak, and we would get dressed and make the 3-hour trip over here from Panama City and go to the church in Live Oak with the people from what was then the Advent Christian Home and Orphanage. And then we'd come back out here, and Mr. Carter, Pomeroy's dad, he and his wife would feed us lunch. And then we always got a tour, and there were people here my mother always wanted to visit. So we did that probably about once a year. We would do that. So I've known about the village since I was little. Sprained my ankle the first time here at the village. But my mother and her sister rode the train over from Panama City to Live Oak, and they took the Lopin Gopher from Live Oak out here to go to Camp Swanee when they were teenagers. So, you know, it's been in our family for years, you know, for a lifetime.
And you finished school in Panama City?
I finished high school at Rutherford High School in Panama City, and then I stayed. I guess now they call it a gap year.
We didn't know that.
We didn't know that, but I stayed out a year and worked before I went to college. And then I went to Berkshire Christian College in Massachusetts, and that's where I met Jim.
And how did you meet Jim?
Well, that's kind of a curious story. He was a year ahead of me, and so his freshman year, Jim was only 5 feet 4 inches tall to my 4 feet 9 inches tall. And so there were no girls there that were shorter than him his freshman year. And so he didn't know, but during the summer, his friends were praying that the Lord would send a short woman to college. And I arrived before he did, because I had to be there for freshman orientation. And when he arrived on campus, all of his friends came running up to him and saying, "She's here, she's here." And he didn't know what they were talking about. But eventually they introduced us and made sure we knew each other. And he asked me out the third Friday of college, and we were together ever since. So.
Wow. And when did you get married?
We got married in 1969. We were married for 52 years before he passed.
And then did you get married while you were both in college, or was it after?
No, after he graduated. I did not finish. I went through my junior year. I did not get my degree. I got my MRS degree. And he always said that I did more with my secretarial skills than I ever would have done with my degree in theology. So that, you know, and he's right. That's what my work was. All the many years was secretarial.
And was it primarily at churches or other?
Oh, no.
Business?
Other businesses, American Heart Association. One was a Presbyterian church. I worked for Trinity Broadcasting Network for 13 years. So it was all over. I will say 5 of the years, let me back up and say Jim and I were employed here at the village twice. We were on staff here at the village twice. The first was 5 years. We were house parents in the child care program for 5 years. And then we came back and tried to they wanted to redo the child care program, but it didn't work out. We did that for a year, and then they asked Jim to be the youth pastor at the church, here at the village church. So we were here a total of 9 years. Actually 10 years. We were here at 2 separate times.
Did you ever think that you would move back here when you retired?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely, because we always said we saw how well everyone was treated, so we wanted to come back and get some of that, you know. So.
And when you were employed here, were you employed other than as a house parent?
Oh, yes. I was the secretary. When he became the youth pastor, I was secretary for Jerry Buchert, one of the vice presidents. For 4 years, I was his secretary.
So that was before
That's when
I arrived.
But I met you.
Yes, right. I knew we had known each other for a long time. For me, that's 15 years ago. So.
Yeah.
Cheryl, what was your favorite part of the country you've lived in?
California. We loved Southern California. We got there in after we'd been there for a while, we thought, well, we may have been Californians all our life and didn't know it. But we really enjoyed California. Couldn't afford it, but we enjoyed it.
And where was Jim born? Where did he grow up?
He was born in Keene, New Hampshire, but when he was 2 years old, they moved to Attleboro, Massachusetts, and that's where he grew up, was Attleboro.
So that's where he started liking baseball?
When he was about 10 years old, well, he and his mother were Episcopalians until he was 10. And then they started attending the little Advent Christian church down the street. And when he was 10 years old was when he was introduced to baseball. And he said you had to be a Red Sox fan or you had nobody to sit with at lunch.
So he never changed that, right?
Never changed it, no.
And are you a baseball fan?
I am now. I know more about baseball than a lot of men do. But yeah, I like baseball.
It's a good pastime.
Yeah, it is.
What are some of your other interests?
I'm a voracious reader. When I was 10 years old, I had rheumatic fever, and from the time I was 10 years old until I was 15, I was not allowed any physical activity at all. And so I read, and I still am a voracious reader. I never learned how to roller skate or play softball because I couldn't physically do all that when all my friends were learning. And I love to do that. And I do that a lot. I like craft things too, crochet and some other things. I love ceramics. I go to ceramics here at the village. So.
And that seems like a nice group that's together.
Yeah, it is.
And I guess you've known Laura a lot of years too.
I've known Laura Putnam for many years, yes. Yeah.
When, do I remember somebody telling me that your Berkshire College roommate is now a resident here?
Yes, Jan Hendrickson, my last roommate in college, and she was getting to the point where she needed to be in a place like this, so I got a hold of her and put her and Karen together, and she eventually moved down here, and that's been really a nice thing for me. She and I spend a lot of time together.
And it's been interesting to me how many people reconnect after having not seen somebody for 50 years, or, and I've had a number of people say, I didn't even know they were living here, one or the other, and then they found each other again. Well,
Jan and I have kept touch over the years. And so, we've always been...
It wasn't a surprise.
No, it was not.
When you were the pastor's wife, what things were expected of you, or did you like to do as far as supporting roles?
Well, I was always very involved in the music part of the church. When I first was a young pastor's wife, I thought it was written down somewhere that pastor's wives had to teach Sunday school. And eventually I realized that I'm not a teacher. It was not good for the children, it was not good for me, and eventually I learned how to say no for that. So that was something that I only did for a few years till God convinced me that otherwise. Mm-hmm. But I was always involved in all the aspects of the church. Never served on the church board. We did not believe a pastor's wife should be on the church board, and so I was never did that. But always was involved in, depending on the church and how big it was and how many volunteers they needed, was part of I always did the church bulletin. Jim wanted me to do that, and so I always did the church bulletin for all those years.
Well, that was using all that secretarial skills you had, and that was great. And it was probably long ago with a stencil and a mimeograph machine.
Mimeograph machine, and then we finally went to a copier, a very old copier, and eventually we had a really good copier in the last church that I was doing it.
Tell us a little bit about what you've done since you moved here as far as volunteer and other activities.
Well, I told you I go to ceramics on Wednesday morning. I love to do ceramics, but I don't want all that stuff cluttering up my house. So I go on Wednesday mornings and make stuff to be sold in the rustic shop.
So you're one of the angels.
Elves.
Elves.
I don't.
Okay.
She started calling us that because we started doing it around Christmas time. So she started calling us ceramics elves. Laura did, and so I do that on Wednesday mornings. I volunteer wherever I'm needed, but not anything on a permanent basis. I give tours of the village, which I really enjoy, for potential residents, people who are looking to see, taking a look at the village. I really enjoy that. And it really thrills me when somebody actually moves here after I give them a tour. So, but I do that on a regular basis. I've got a tour coming up pretty soon.
Oh, this morning?
No,
Oh,
no,
okay.
in a couple of weeks. So, and I sing in the church choir.
And I understand, Cheryl, you also sing in the church choir.
Yes, I do that. Yeah.
And as I remember, if I remember correctly, that when there have been dramas and other programs, you've taken part in that as
yes,
well.
I have. When I'm
Dramas and musicals. Yes.
right. As part of the Christmas and Easter cantatas, yes.
Are you working on an Easter cantata yet?
Yes, we are. We are. It's going to be really magnificent. So.
Wonderful. Back to your reading. What genre of books do you like?
Well, I read for enjoyment, so I don't read anything that's heavy. I do like mysteries. I like romance. I particularly like reading books that were set in the 1800s. I like that period of history. And I've been rereading some books that were written, started right from early 1900s through 1950s by the same author. And I've been rereading her books.
Who was that author?
Emily Loring. She wrote a lot about the First World War. They're romances, but they wrote about the First World War and then about the Second World War, and her last one was the Korean War. Those are some of the settings.
I don't know if it tells me something about my age, but I got rid of a lot of books just because I had no more room so I could get new books. But now if I'm at a book sale somewhere, I'm starting to buy back the books I really love that I gave away.
Well, when we moved from California to retire, I had a lot of books, but I also had a Kindle. So I got rid of all the books except the ones that are no longer in print. I kept those. And most of Emily Loring's were not in print, but now they're available on my e-reader, so I have them on there now instead of in the paperback.
But there's so many books I want to read that I always feel like, well, should I reread a book? But there are just a few that I'm going to reread. I know.
Oh, I reread books, and my husband could never understand that. Once he read a book, he closed it and put it on the shelf, and that was, But I do like Louis L'Amour books too. My family is all addicted to Louis L'Amour books. My dad and my mother had all of the books. They read all of them, so we all kind of got indoctrinated into that. Both of my parents were also voracious readers, and that's where we picked it up from.
What do you like to travel?
Oh, yeah.
Where are your favorite places you visited?
Well, I like one of the places that Jim and I visited several times was Williamsburg, Virginia. That was one of our favorites. And we liked Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. We go back to California every couple of years or so.
Do you have travel plans?
I have had travel plans, but COVID seems to resurge and cancels our plans. And some of the ladies and I have made plans to do some traveling once we everything gets settled down, So, I really do want to.
I'm looking forward to it, and I hope one of my big travel plans doesn't get canceled again this year. I know that with all the time you spent with youth ministry, alongside your husband and working here, What advice would you give a young person today?
I know that one thing that has amazed me, surprised me, and pleased me is that many of the kids who were in our youth group when Jim was youth pastor here couldn't wait to get out of Dowling Park. So they went to college and whatever. But my advice is look back to where you were raised, because now those young people are adults with children of their own. They're moving back to raise their children here. So I would say look at where you were raised and appreciate where you were raised and who the people that were influencing you in your life. And that, I think, is very important.
And there's something grounding to me about that.
Yeah.
I grew up in a small town that's no longer a small town, but I had the urge to live in a small town again, and I'm glad I've moved to Dowling Park.
Yeah, it's really thrilling to me that my service coordinator here at the village was one of our kids when we were here as the youth pastor, Emily Peacock, and she is now my service coordinator, and I think this is so thrilling to me, you know, that she's now an employee of the village.
That's kind of a completing the circle, isn't it?
It is. Yes, it is.
When I was the administrator of a retirement community in Jacksonville, I looked at one of the applications. I go, I know that gentleman. He was the director of our camp, our church summer camp. Yeah. And I thought, oh, I hope he doesn't remember everything about me. What kind of questions do people ask you when they're on the tour? Are there things?
Well, one of the things is, how far is it to Walmart? And when I tell them, you know, it's like, oh my goodness. But most of the questions have to do with how long have I been here? Do I really like it here? And, you know, it's mostly questions like that, because the tour I give tells them, okay, this is the dining room, this is the facility, this is the Copeland Community Center, whatever. I give them the facts. So I don't get many questions about that. It's more how to, you know, the social life here. Mm-hmm. What is there to do, and you know, just those kinds of things is what I get a lot of that type of question, and not so much about the facilities, because I give them that information,
right?
You know,
I guess they just want to hear somebody talk about the things that are not in the brochure and how you are adjusting, or anybody who's giving the tours.
That's right. They ask a lot about the church too, and are always surprised when I tell them that we got 19 denominations worshiping under one roof, and you know, it's that's always.
And there are other churches nearby, and a number of people leave campus to go to church.
Yeah.
Well, I think it would be interesting hearing the questions, but I've talked to a number of people that moved in during the pandemic or right before, and they have been so amazed, you know, as things are opening back up, but felt like they couldn't have lived in a better place during that time.
That's what I say too. When I lost my husband, the support here. There are so many women who are in the same situation that I am. And I couldn't have lived in a better place than this when that happened. You know, the support has been tremendous. It's been 6 months now, and, you know, the support is just amazing.
And I'm sure you'll offer that same support when somebody else is facing that.
Absolutely.
What would you like to tell our viewers that we haven't talked about?
I think we covered pretty much everything. So you're a good interviewer.
Well, thank you. I wasn't looking for that. But Cheryl, thank you so much for being here and taking the time to do this, and for all you've done for the village throughout the years.
Well, thank you for asking.
And I know you'll keep doing things.
I have enjoyed it.
Great. Thanks. Thank you so much for tuning in to Front Porch Conversations. Hope you'll come back and visit with us again.